At Empower Us, we're delivering compelling conversations on nonprofit tech and fundraising. We're bringing together nonprofit leaders in the field and tech providers that are powering missions around the world. This week, we're talking digital disruption and major giving with Leah Petrovani Miller, Keith Hannon, and Sean Olds. We'll cover how the landscape has changed, what the major gifts officer of the future will look like, and the principles that can't be left behind.
My name is Leah Petrovani Miller. I'm a major gift officer at the Bowery Mission in New York City. I've been there for the last 4 years, and I've been doing fundraising for just about the last 10 years.
Hi, my name's Keith Hannon. I'm with Cornell University. I'm a major gift officer stationed in the Department of Athletics. Before that, I spent about 5.5 years in Central Alumni Affairs, where I did digital engagement and social media community management before making the jump to the dark side of fundraising.
Hi, I'm Sean Olds. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Boodle AI. We are a people-focused predictive analytics platform powered by machine learning that helps nonprofits find more of their best donors. And while I've been a technology startup guy pretty much my entire life after getting out of the Army, I spent the past 25 years serving on a variety of nonprofit boards, mostly focused on youth education or veteran service organizations.
Well, I guess we'd kick off thinking about the major gift officer role more broadly. And Keith, maybe you can start with this one. What do you think are the biggest changes that you've seen from the role and the expectations of that role over the course of your career?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest changes is the access to data and information about our donors. I think on one hand, universities used to, a lot of times you'd pay class dues or you'd have some sort of relationship with the university so that you could tap into your class network or the university's network. And now with the creation of online communities, our alumni don't need us anymore for that information. They just network on their own and they update their information on LinkedIn and not with our internal databases. So I think, how we obtain information about our constituents has really changed. We can't count on them to give it to us anymore. We have to kind of be out on the hunt for it and make sure that our records are up to date, because that really drives how we rate people, what we put them at for capacity, what we think they'll give us or what they have the ability to give us. And if none of that employment information or address information, if all of that's out of date, that's really going to change a lot of what we do. And I think also the way we communicate with those donors. I remember getting to Cornell and talking with gift officers about developing relationships digitally, and some people really didn't like that idea. And then people would kind of pull me aside and say, I've been here long enough where I can remember being in a boardroom and people saying, I know a lot of people are starting to use this email thing, but this will never be a way we communicate with our high profile donors. It's just too informal. The electronic mail is just too informal. So, I think with the explosion of technology and how everything has accelerated faster than ever, everyone's walking around with a TV station in their pocket. I think we've had to kind of embrace, or I hope we continue to embrace, this idea of a more casual communication with our biggest benefactors, and being okay with that and understanding that there's opportunity with that as well, assuming everyone's okay with it.
I would jump in there and say that I absolutely agree. And the shift of how we communicate with donors has really changed over the last several years. And I think the mentality shift that you're talking about, Keith, has also changed in the industry, of this hesitation to have a more casual relationship with donors, to now I'm seeing in my own work and in the work of my colleagues, that's actually more of the gold standard, if you get to a texting relationship with a donor, that's a great thing. It's kind of similar to a donor welcoming you into their home and welcoming you into their world. that is a really deep engagement opportunity, as opposed to having kind of a snail mail formal relationship where you address letters to Mr. and Mrs. Now on my phone, I get texts from donors all the time that just say, hey, I was thinking about this, and just that level of engagement. And then if you think about it from the donor's perspective, as an individual in my personal life, I text people who are close to me. And so if I, as the development officer, am the person that the donor is texting, then we've gotten to a place in the relationship where we're in their inner world and in their sphere. I'm thinking about how their philanthropy impacts the rest of their life. I think that that's a huge added benefit to technology, is the capacity of one's network being so much larger, and there's less geographical scope and limitations on how we can connect with one another.
Yeah, I think in the past, when maybe donors, especially, major gift, principal gift level donors, have valued formality, I think we're seeing a shift where people value their time.
Yeah.
And if they can get down to business over text versus having to clear an hour and a half off their schedule to have lunch with me, I think that's almost preferred. In a lot of ways, people are busy. We're all busier, and we've kind of just gotten used to doing business electronically and just getting things done. There's always going to be a place for that more formal meeting where you're looking to close something, or you're having a discussion about a really transformational gift. That will probably continue to be important, assuming you're not in a pandemic. but I remember my dad was, 30 years worked at IBM, and one time IBM was the gold standard of everyone wears a suit and everyone's a team player in the company. And then I remember one day my dad said, well, IBM said we don't need to wear suits anymore. And it was khakis and button-ups and all, and that's a big shift for a company like that. But these shifts happen, and we can't keep wearing suits if everyone else is wearing khakis and button-ups. And so again, it's all about the donor and what they want to do. And if they're used to conducting their business a certain way, we can't stay stuck in the past.
Keith, I loved what you said about the emails, because I'm assuming both you and Leo agree that 12 months ago, if you got caught trying to raise a major gift donation over Zoom, you likely would have been relieved. And today it's just commonplace, because it has been driven that way. And to your point, I think a lot of high net worth donors are excited by the fact that they can get through a 30-minute phone call, do their donation, and not sit through an hour-and-a-half lunch or a 2-hour dinner and have the rest of their day back. I will say one thing I see that's a little bit concerning, and it's neat to hear both of you talk about the informal relationships you're able to build and how you're leveraging technology to actually enhance the relationship. I'm going to say something that's kind of probably opposite of what you would expect to come out of a technology guy's mouth, but I actually see some people in the advancement world who are letting technology actually degrade their relationship. And they're turning the fundraising into purely transaction, because it is easy to get done. It is easy to get through. And you don't see people as much sending the handwritten thank you notes out, or the other touch points that Leo was talking about building, where you just text people. And I think there's a huge danger there if you just let technology kind of run your fundraising, that you're end up going to losing not only your major donors, but just really good donors along the way. When we talk about AI, I don't believe in the Terminator. I don't believe that there's a self-living AI out there that's going to just tell you what to do and is going to go do fundraising for you. The real power is that human AI team. And I think it's the same thing with technology. The technology is not there to in any way replace major gift officers or major gift teams, but really empower them to build that relationship that you were talking about, Leah.
Yeah, and to that point, Sean, I'd be curious to hear from Leah and Keith too. As you mentor people in the space that are coming up through the ranks, how do you explain what are the valuable features of a major gift officer of the future that's going to be able to marry this technology with the personal? Do you have favorite pieces of advice or wisdom you share?
As I think about the most central components of a successful gift officer, it kind of fits into two different categories. One is the kind of the intangible capacity to relate to another person. So it's, you are relatable and kind of easygoing and can articulate the mission of your organization, the need of the organization, connect donors who care about it intrinsically to that mission. and really build genuine relationships. And that's something that I think has always been a part of the industry, and I hope will always continue to be, because that's really what we're doing, is we're connecting our partners and our supporters to the work that they're funding. And then the other component is the piece where I think technology does play in, which is the capacity to plan and strategize and use all of the tools in our toolbox, whether that is that handwritten note that you're talking about, Sean, or the data from our CRM databases, or looking at the calendar of the year and thinking about what touch points can be done at what different times. And so that capacity to strategize and plan, I would say, is the other component of a successful person in this role. And so I think that as technology continues to evolve, I think as an industry, fundraising does tend to be about 10 years behind. So, I think in my own organization and in other teams that I've worked at, and other colleagues, we often are a little bit behind in implementing technologies. That's why I think, Sean, your company is so important, because a lot of fundraising teams do need a little bit of help getting into the current century in terms of how we're using technology to aid our work. But I would say that those different tools can be really helpful as we strategize and plan. But what you were referring to, Sean, I think is absolutely right, that if we allow technology to supersede the importance of building genuine connection and relationships, that's where we will be beholden to the systems, as opposed to allowing the tools and the systems that were created to serve us in our work.
Totally. And, the way I look at it is technology is just the vehicle. And, I left college and fled to the West Coast and spent almost a decade working in LA. Most of my background has been dedicated to pursuing careers that have to do with storytelling. And so as I got into advancement work, I just saw the evolution of the technology is just a better opportunity to tell the story of my institution, tell the story of the student experience. And now it's the student athlete experience and the impact that you can have on that. So I totally agree that we can't just think the technology is going to do its work, or the technology is going to do our work, because yes, higher ed is not known for being nimble. And, there are millions of nonprofits across the country and the world that are far more nimble than higher ed, right? It's not always easy to support higher ed right now with our billion-dollar endowments when you have GoFundMes where people are trying to pay medical bills. And so when people think about, their philanthropy right now, it's easy to see that maybe my alma mater is not the most in need as I look around my local community. And so using technology to tell the story and show the impact, I think, is crucial, because if we do it right, we can show how anything you'd want to support at the local level or the global level is probably being done at the university. Somewhere within the university, that work's also being done and has the benefit or the potential to impact your community and the people that you want to support. So, and I also think we look at technology maybe a little too much as just the outward facing. So, using technology as a storytelling vehicle for your donors is one thing. Using it behind the scenes to get a better grasp on donor data, donor behavior, and really analyzing the data analytics of your constituency and trying to figure out, how you can work smarter, not just faster, I think is really important, because a lot of us in higher ed are dealing with slashed budgets. We're expected to raise more with less. And the only way you're going to do that is if you use technology on the back end as well.
And one thing that you brought up, Leah, that I feel like we should take a moment to dig in on a little bit is the fact that fundraisers and maybe major gift officers in particular feel 10 years behind when it comes to technology. And Sean is someone that's been working in the tech and nonprofit space for decades. I would just be curious to hear, why do you think that is, and what do you feel like could be done to help level the playing field and bring more nonprofits up to speed on the technology side?
Well, in January, I fully agreed with Leah, and I never would have sat down and said we need a global pandemic to get them up to speed. But I really feel like nonprofits have accelerated around the technology adoption curve more in the past 10 months than they did in the past 10 years.
I would agree
Uh,
with that.
I mean, you see, as I mentioned before, the use of Zoom very prolifically, the use of Slack. There's a variety of different tools, and frankly, the website is getting a lot more use. That is now an organization's 24-hour messaging tool that they can get out and show what they're doing, what they're accomplishing. And what's great is you're seeing companies that are pivoting or just adapting to what our next normal is going to be. While I haven't heard a single nonprofit complain about, boy, I can't wait till we can quit using Zoom and get back into the office and do lunch meetings, as Keith was talking about. Zoom is here to stay. People are going to continue to use Zoom. Now, that being said, I don't think in the nonprofit world you're ever going to see the in-person gala go away completely for a virtual gala. But I think the advent of what's going to happen is you're going to start to see more hybrid galas, which I think is very powerful, right? Because now you can have the Bowery, Leia's organization can have an event in New York City, which is a wonderful geography to raise money in. But now the individual who lives in New York but was traveling and wasn't able to attend can now attend while they're on a business meeting in San Francisco. And supporters who live around the country can attend virtually and just become more involved and more connected to the organization. So while I wouldn't have answered that we needed a global pandemic, I think that the pandemic has, if you're going to make lemonade out of lemons, it has done a lot to get them ramped up. And I think there's going to be a natural affinity towards, once people see the power of technology, whether it's through communications with Zoom or internal communications with Slack, or data analytics with a variety of AI tools that are out there now, people are going to get more comfortable with it and just use it more. And that's what's going to cause an increased adoption.
And do you all think that there's, now that we're introducing new tools and new methods at a higher rate, is there rationale for changing team structure within fundraising? Like, would you advocate that every fundraising team should have a digital gifts officer? Is something I've read a little bit about. I would just be curious if you think there's anything that you've found would be better on your own team or organizations you're familiar with.
Well, I would say I think every gift officer has to be prepared to be a digital gift officer, not just have it be someone else's job. I'm don't want to just sit here and boast, but I'm proud that I did. Before the pandemic, I closed a $350,000 gift over Zoom. And so, these things can be done. And, when I was interviewing for my job, I was pitching, we should really use, something like a Zoom to, get our coaches out in front of all of their benefactors in one big hangout and just have a discussion about the program. And that's December 2018. So that just felt like cool idea, Keith, but, probably not a top priority right now. And then, the world kind of ends in March, and it's like, wow, we have no choice but to do these digital town hall type concepts that we had talked about in December of 2018. And you get all of a sudden, we have 300 people logging in for every one of them. And so it is interesting how conditions have forced the hand. And now, I think universities all over the country are starting to look at, they don't need to be brick and mortar for a lot of their advancement work. And, what does that mean for, traveling? I know a lot of universities are looking at, we probably don't need to do as much travel as we used to do. We don't have to send gift officers all over the country, from Ithaca to California to Seattle. That's costly. And, if you really add it all up, what are the returns on a lot of those trips? So yeah, I think it's definitely going to change team structures. It's going to force everybody to be more digital minded. And I think there's going to be serious pushback from people who've been in this role for 20, 25 years. And, I think there's also a role for more digital support. So it doesn't have to be necessarily a fundraiser, but, we've always had kind of major gift associates that have helped fundraisers, and maybe someone like that takes on a more digital role. I've advocated for every major gift shop should have a digital communicator / storyteller within that shop to help the fundraisers who are just really kind of working on moving people through stages and closing gifts. Some of the best help that they could get is for someone producing that digital content for them to share with the donors, if that's something that doesn't come naturally for them. So that's that's a couple ways I see that going.
Yeah, I would I would agree with Keith in that I don't know that I would advocate that there be a new role created that's called digital gift officer, because I see that's more focused on the needs of the organization as opposed to how the donor relates. And by that I mean, if I'm the donor, I'm thinking about making a gift on the website versus making a gift via check. That's not the central part of my relationship with the organization. That's just how I'm making the transaction happen. But I do think that a role which has been around for a long time, but I think is becoming even more important as we have more access to information with the internet and capacity to research, is a person who's doing prospect research or prospect development within the major gifts team. I think that is going to be incredibly more important as we have more access to information and we have capacity to use tools smarter. I would say that, Keith, you mentioned having everyone be a digital development officer, I think is really important, is, having a website that's easy to navigate, that has really good user interface, that doesn't have too much traction between when you get to the front page to when you're able to make a transaction in a gift, having really good search engine optimization. When you type in university, you see Cornell come up, or when you type in homelessness, you see the Bowery Mission come up, because that's generally the population that we're serving. So I think using technology to help us is going to be really important, but I don't know. There are a lot of different schools of thought of how to segment different portfolios based on the gift officers that you have on your team. So my personal opinion is that having a portfolio that's for digital development might not be exactly the way to go, but I think giving every single gift officer the tools and the fluency to understand how to use technology in our work day to day.
Yeah, it seems like it also may be not serving you the best to segment donors that you cover within your portfolio as digital or not, right? Because we see that more and more super high net worth or high donors are preferring to engage digitally. So it's like something everyone needs to be prepared to manage. And as you mentioned, all the tools that have at your fingertips, I see one thing that comes up in a lot of conversations is, okay, so now I'm being bombarded with hundreds of things I could be using on wealth screening or donor management or this and that. And maybe Sean, you can start this one off, but I would just be curious if you have sort of best practices or rule of thumb of knowing like when it's time to upgrade, when you need a new tool, when it's going to be just adding to your plate and not something you use. Would just love to explore that a bit.
I can talk about it from the perspective of when we're interacting with clients, it's because they're either dissatisfied with the tools they have, they're enlarging the organization, and they know they need to build up individual giving capacity, and that's what they're focused on. Or they've just made a transition to a new CRM, and they've now got a really good hold of their data, but they want to figure out how not to spend months digging through it before they can action it. They want to action it more quickly. So what we always tell organizations is, we're here when the time's right. I'd never want to force any type of technology, be it AI or Zoom or anything else on an organization that it's just not right for. The big thing I say in our space always, though, is understand what's happening with your data, whether it's a CRM that you're using, whether it's a predictive analytics platform or a wealth screening tool that you're using. Understand how your data is getting used on the back end, because there are a lot of companies out there that are taking that data and taking ownership of it. You may still have access to it and use it, but they're off using it for other purposes, and that's how they make their money. When we started off with the organization, we made a very strict rule that our clients' data is their data. It doesn't get shared with any other client or with any other organizations. And that's something a lot of people kind of gloss over. And you see events happening in the news where that's coming to bear. And it's going to cause issues if donors feel like their data is not secure with particular organizations that they're working with.
Keith or Leah, as you've sat through pitches or looked at different technology, what have you found work best to kind of like get to the heart of the matter of what's most useful to you, or to help identify tools that aren't really going to be additive?
One of the most important things that has been a challenge is having different vendors or different tools that integrate with the current tools that we currently have. So, we use the Raiser's Edge database, which is one of the largest that nonprofits use in this space for managing donor information. And I've looked at a really great tool that's not going to integrate with Raiser's Edge, and the kind of the added work of manually managing that integration just isn't worth it, because I think the biggest barrier to nonprofits using tech in a smart way to their advantage, which might really impact their ROI, is the cost of the investment today is not one that nonprofits can bear or can stomach, especially smaller organizations or ones who have a really lean structure in terms of how they're spending to raise a dollar. So I would say, one of the most important things is having a tool that can very easily integrate or naturally integrate with the current tools that organizations use, and also one that doesn't create more work, because most organizations don't have a person who's responsible for going out and finding new tools. You're in the middle of your work, you're seeing a problem, you're kind of trying to figure out how to solve that problem, and you need something that's going to work tomorrow because there's too much to do and there are too many problems that are, so to speak, on fire to address.
I would totally agree with that. It's really important to almost be careful what you're after. I mean, if you spend money to get a whole bunch of data and information, or you sign on with a software that you think is going to provide a solution, are you adequately staffed to utilize the results of that software? I mean, there's a lot of programs out there that can get you data coming out of a fire hose, right? But do you have the team that can then take that data and make sense of it and figure out, how that's going to help you reach your goals? Sometimes what I've seen is we have access to tons of data, but it almost creates more time to go through it and build reports from it. And, if you don't have somebody that can really spend time with that, you're going to end up paying for a lot of information that you can't really put into practice. And, that's why it's really important to know really what you're trying to get out of something before you sign on. I mean, I think sometimes we get so many emails about new products and, how this can help us in our advancement shop. And sometimes things sound really good, but did we really take the time to think about, does it really solve a problem that we have? Is it the right tool for what we're trying to accomplish? Or did it just sound really good? And well, those other schools that we compete with have it, so we better get it, So I think there's a lot that goes into not only how you choose something, but then making sure you really have you're adequately staffed enough to make use of it. And if you aren't, maybe start small, like run more pilots instead of just jumping into big enterprise software. Like, can you demonstrate what you think the product is going to provide kind of manually? Like, that's how I kind of started off at Cornell. I started doing a lot of manual data entry type stuff. It was painful, but I thought it was important to prove concept before asking my superiors to make a bigger investment in something that could automate it. But once I showed that it was clear there was something there, then it made sense to jump in. So sometimes it's a side project that I would do at home, or that you might have to do on the side to prove concept and start from there. But it's worth it if it's going to help get buy-in or show you that it's not worth investing in.
One thing that you addressed, Keith, that I really agree with is understanding the need that you're trying to address with whatever tool you're looking for. And as I think about what is most helpful for nonprofit organizations seeking new technology tools, it's looking at what are small incremental changes that can make the biggest impact. What little levers can I turn that's going to make a big return on the other end? Because if I look at all of the problems that I'm trying to solve, it might seem overwhelming or insurmountable, but think about small little things that can be shifted or changed that will have a big impact. And then I think, Keith, too, if you're trying to, prove that X, Y, or Z technology tool is going to make an impact, then starting small and then scaling from there is going to really help if you're trying to make a case for a new technology implementation.
We have the same mantra in startup world, right? Of like doing things that don't scale. It's like super applicable within organizations too, to sort of test out the ROI on your time and how much, you know, if you could have something automated that replicated that value. So I think that's a great piece of advice. And I guess along those lines, pain points that you're currently seeing today, you know, at your organizations, Keith and Leah, or Sean, at your clients, what do you feel like is the biggest piece of your job in need of more tech disruption? I know we've gone through 10 months of like hyper disruption, but if you could put something at the top of the list to be addressed next, what would that be?
That's a tough question. You know, where do you begin with that? I'll think more about it, but the first thing that comes to mind is, I wonder if we need more tech disruption or more acceptance of the disruption. I think the tech is there. I think there's plenty of tech for us to get our arms around right now. We just have to be willing to accept the change that it's ushering in and be adaptable and flexible. You know, again, I think there is such competition, more than there ever has been, for the philanthropic dollar out there. And you really have to look at different pieces of tech as just one tool in your tool chest, and not look for that, you know, one size fits all solution that's going to bring in millions of dollars in a week. It still takes work, but, you know, and first of all, I still love writing handwritten letters, because I think it's weird, as everyone was kind of talking about, with all this technology, when someone gets something in the mail, it's like, wow, that's thoughtful. You know, so I still highly recommend that. I mean, I send out, you know, at least 100 cards a year probably. So I think that's still, there's a place for that. And so understanding where technology has accelerated so fast, where old style stuff can occasionally have a lot of impact. But yeah, what I see kind of internally is there's always going to be resistance to change. I mean, that's just human nature. And I think it's especially true in higher ed when you're talking about 200-year-old institutions. And things, you know, have really changed quickly in the last 10, 15 years. I mean, 10 years, I mean, 9 years ago, I got hired at Cornell to become a social media community manager. And there were people internally who thought it was ridiculous to pay someone to do that. And now, if you were to say you as a university don't have a social media strategy, you would be like, well, who would enroll in a place like that, right? So it has come so fast. And so I think just the willingness to be flexible, to pilot things, to have people within your organization that you're always tasking them to try the new things and give them bandwidth to do that and give them permission to fail. I think, you know, you sit in enough meetings where people give ideas and you get the sense that nobody ever wants to be wrong, right? No one ever wants to submit an idea that doesn't work out. And so there's a lot of pressure to always succeed. But I think it's really important with technology to create a space internally where failure is okay. And it might not work, but it's probably really valuable to know what's not working so that you don't make bigger investments in that technology. So I think really it's about opening our minds and being willing to consider that wealthy people especially are okay with having a relationship over some of these mediums, and that they don't see it as any kind of an informal or insulting approach on our part. And at the end of the day, we got to be donor centric.
I think it's totally disruption for the nonprofit community is going to come through adoption. There are still a lot of organizations that haven't adopted yet, and that's going to be their disruption. But I think you're absolutely right. And to the point you and Leah both made earlier, it's adoption of the right technologies. You know, some organizations don't need, AI. We deal with clients all the time who are really focused on just grants from foundations and from corporates, and don't really need AI to find individual donors. So it's really finding what's right for your organization and what's going to help your organization. But Keith, I like your point also that you made, that it's really recognizing what you do need. We sat down and we're about to partner with an events organization that they spent 12 months getting ready for an event, and they would spend 3 months just manually going through data, and then that gave them the 6 months before the event to fundraise. We're literally able to take what they did in 3 months and do it in about 3 hours for them. And so now, instead of 3 months of research and 6 months of fundraising, they have 9 months of fundraising. And it's just getting out and realizing certain tools exist to do that. And I always talk about the concept of AI. AI is kind of like an iceberg. The AI you use for fundraising is that little bit that sticks out of the water, but there's actually a lot of programmatic uses for AI that is below the water. And I think most donors, if they see you using AI and technology in a programmatic way, they don't see their money as much of a donation as they do an investment. And that, I think, it really helps you at the end of the day, fundraising wise.
Mitch, going back to your question about what are the biggest pain points that technology could aid, just thinking from the perspective of nonprofits with small budgets, I think it's simple things like moves management tools. A lot of people are still tracking their moves management, their to-do list on pen and paper, which works, but there are a lot of effective tools out there like Asana. There are some integrative tools that work with Raiser's Edge that you could use to plan out your moves, and every day you get a notification on the things that you need to do this week, and simple things like that can make a huge impact. Another thing that comes to mind is some email optimization. I think that having an email interface that can integrate with Raiser's Edge that will automatically create an action for you, or that will create a reminder, or you can easily go from one tool to the other would be really helpful. Having the capacity to do a little bit more analysis on emails. So things like open rates and reminders when emails haven't been responded to, simple things like that, I think would make a huge impact. And then another thing that comes to mind is I think that one of the benefits of how I've seen the industry change is that major gift fundraising, in my experience, is a little bit less siloed than it used to be. There used to kind of be the major gift team that was off. They wouldn't go to any meetings. They would just be out of the office talking to donors on their own all of the time, which I think does have some benefit because, the more time you spend with donors, the deeper those relationships are, the more they're invested in the organization. But you miss that potential for collaboration with the rest of the team. And so I think one thing that in this virtual environment that is one of the downsides, I guess, of all of us kind of working from home in our own different environments is that capacity to collaborate can be affected. And so I think, Sean, you've mentioned Slack, tools like that, where the team can be more closely connected are going to be really important. Using media assets that the marketing team is putting together to tell stories well. I think that, with we all kind of expect for videos to be a certain caliber of quality. And so spending the time and investing in those resources are going to be really important tools to utilize. So those are things that come to mind when I think about what are the current pain points and then the pieces of technology that could make the biggest impact.
Last question for everyone is just, if putting your crystal ball in front of you, if you could predict like 5 to 10 years from now, who could have predicted what the pandemic would do to the space? But how do you think your role will change over the next 5 to 10 years as a major gift officer? If you can make 1 or 2 predictions about where the world is heading. Sorry, it's another hard amorphous question.
Well, I think definitely we're doing less travel. I think you might see more of a rise in not only Zoom video conference conversations with donors, but I think you probably will see an increase in regional gift officers based around the country, if not the globe, versus everyone on campus flying places. I think the work from home revolution is well underway, and that will provide opportunities for universities, I think, to hire great talent and not make them move to small little college towns in the middle of nowhere. No offense to Ithaca, but it will really expand the footprint of of our work. You know, that's the in-person sense of it. I mean, we have a few of those individuals right now based in the Southeast and the West Coast, but I think it's going to probably increase. And I think I will hope that over the next 5 to 10 years, we'll really see technology as an opportunity to turn philanthropy into really an experience and a journey, and not transactional. You know, not, you know, you grow up in this industry being taught the 5 stages of donor development. And what I'm trying to reimagine it now more as a story arc than 5 stages, you know, a story arc like you would have in a movie. And what is that experience like for the donor? You know, where does the climax happen? Where's the resolution? Where's the conflict? You know, you have a lot of donors that initially there's going to be some reason why they're not sure they want to give. So what is that conflict, and what does the conflict resolution look like? You know, how do you get them to where you want them to go, and how do you make that more of an engaging, enriching experience where they don't not only feel more connected to you as a donor, but more connected to the individuals benefiting from their philanthropy. I think there's going to be an increased pressure, and I think there already is, if we're being honest. There's increased pressure to better demonstrate the impact of philanthropy. I think as younger generations move into your major gift population, we know they already demand more. They want more transparency with how their money's being used, and where there's going to be pressure on us to demonstrate that. And I think technology is going to play a huge role in that. We're going to have to tell that story. We're going to have to show that impact, not just, hey, take my word for it from an email. You know, you change student lives. No, show me the student whose life I am changing with my scholarship. I want to hear from them. I want to hear their backstory. So we're going to have to get to that level of detail, I think, if we're going to continue to raise the money we need to raise to not only, you know, fund our academic programs, but also the research happening in our universities. It's going to be increasingly important.
One thing that I would add, which is kind of the opposite of what you asked, what I hope does not change, or what I hope that we continue to hold fast to, is that just the fundamental principle that donors don't owe the organization anything. That every time a donor decides to make a gift, that is a personal decision that they're making, that they are not, and they don't need to make. And so our responsibility as major gift officers, as fundraisers, is to develop meaningful relationships between the donor and the impact that they're making with their giving, and perhaps shift the mentality from this person is a donor to this person is a partner, they're an investor, that you know, they're giving something to the organization, but the organization also has the capacity to give something to the donor. I see that, you know, my role as a gift officer is to help people live out their calling for making the world a better place. You know, people who give to the Bowery Mission are giving because they care about social justice, they care about equity and access, and they want to make what they see as broken whole. And so I think that, you know, I hope that organizations like ours are no longer necessary in 10 years because there are no people without a home, but that doesn't seem to be the case. And so as our work becomes more important, as, you know, equity becomes more disparate, and the separation between those with much and those with little that chasm gets larger, I think it's really important to remind ourselves that in the midst of the noise and the busyness of the work and the day and planning all of the things, the most important thing is to remind ourselves of the why of why donors are giving, and then help the donor remember the why of why they're giving. And, you know, Keith, you talked about the importance of transparency and reporting and that storytelling. I think it's so important because all of us are humans are looking for belonging and meaning in life. And I think philanthropy has a huge capacity to bring so much meaning into our lives. And so I see it as our responsibility as fundraisers to help build that connection between the donor and their gift and the impact that they're making. And I think that, yes, one impact of that will be that donors are more excited about giving again. But even if it doesn't make another gift, I think it's still our responsibility to steward that gift well. And I think technology has a huge capacity to help us tell stories with integrity and help those stories be amplified. As opposed to one person telling a story to one person, you can record it over video and share it with 10,000 people.
I think you said you put a 5-year horizon on it. So what happens in 5 years? I wouldn't surmise where things are going to be in 5 years. I mean, if you think about 5 years ago, Facebook fundraising didn't exist. It got its start 4 years ago, and no one surmised 5 years ago it would be one of the predominant ways a lot of nonprofits raise money today. I can tell you what we're seeing and what we're getting asked for by major gift officers is, one is to be more precise, and two is to help them really find diamonds in the rough. So, the major gift officers we work with, if they're getting 1 out of 10 major gifts, they look at 10 prospects and they get 1. The ones we're working with would much rather make 5 phone calls and get 2 donors in. And so they're really looking for us to take a large group of prospects and use machine learning, use AI to really narrow it down to a smaller group, but then get a higher hit rate with that. One of the other things we found is, as Keith, you mentioned, there's a lot of data out there. This year we're dealing with food banks, which are, because of the pandemic, are being inundated with first-time donors, which is a wonderful thing for them, but it's a huge burden on the development team that is now trying to figure out, well, which of these first-time donors are the 20% that are going to become lifetime donors, and which are the 80% that are going to churn. And so being able to go through a huge prospect list and find the diamonds in the rough, if you will. We had one organization, they went through their email newsletter list, which they had never solicited before. And we built them a major gift guide on a model for their major gift donors. And when they applied it, they found a woman in there who on one phone call gave $10,000. And she had been on their email distribution list for 8 years and had never donated before that. So those things are out there, and that's what we're getting asked for. And I'm sure there will be many, many other asks that evolve over the next 5 years.
Well, great. We've taken enough of your time this morning, so really appreciate everybody joining us, and a ton of really valuable insight and information for people. So appreciate everyone's thoughts, and we'll chat soon. Thanks everyone for tuning in.
Thanks, Mitch. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nice to see you. Thanks for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed this week's discussion. Be sure to join Empower Us for more resources and one-on-one help in finding the tech solutions you need. If you have any feedback or suggestions, you can email us at info@empowerus.org. Thank you.